December 7th, 1941, 7:55 in the morning. Two young pilots were still in their tuxedo trousers from the night before when Japanese bombs started falling on Wheeler Field. One of them grabbed a telephone, the other ran for a car, and before that Sunday morning was finished, the two of them would account for more Japanese aircraft than any other Americans alive that day. One of those two men was Second Lieutenant George Schwartz Welch. He was 23 years old. He had been a fighter pilot for barely a year. And what he did on December 7, 1941 was so extraordinary that his commanding general reportedly recommended him for the highest military decoration in the country, only for the award to be stopped somewhere above him. The reason given, though no primary document has ever been produced to confirm it. He had taken off without permission. George Schwartz Welch was born on May 10, 1918, in Wilmington, Delaware. His father was a senior research chemist at the DuPont Experimental Test Station. The family's original surname was Schwartz, a German name, and in the anti-German climate that lingered after the First World War, his parents changed it to Welch, his mother's maiden name. George kept Schwartz as a middle name. The young man who would one day fly into history carried in his own name the residue of one war's prejudice, pointed directly at another. He attended St. Andrew's School near Middletown, Delaware, then enrolled at Purdue University to study mechanical engineering, completing 3 years before leaving, in October of 1939, to join the United States Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. He completed his pilot training at Brooks Field, Kelly Field, and Randolph Field in Texas, and at Hamilton Field in California. On October 4, 1940, he was commissioned a second lieutenant and awarded his wings at Kelly Field. In early 1941, he was posted to the 47th Pursuit Squadron, part of the 15th Pursuit Group, at Wheeler Field on the island of Oahu, in the territory of Hawaii. Wheeler Field sat on the flat central plain of Oahu, ringed by red volcanic soil and pineapple fields, with the Koolau Range rising to the east. It was a peacetime posting. The men flew training missions, competed in athletics, and attended formal dinner dances at the Officers' Club on Saturday evenings. The dress code for those events was black tie. George Welch fit in naturally. His nickname in the squadron was Wheaties. He was physically sharp, mechanically gifted in the air, and easy with the other men. His commanding officer, Major Gordon Austin, had chosen both Welch and a 21-year-old Oklahoma pilot named Kenneth Taylor as his flight commanders shortly after they arrived in Hawaii. Taylor was a quietly determined young man who had briefly studied law at the University of Oklahoma before deciding he would rather fly. He and Welch became close friends and a habitual pairing in the air. In early December of 1941, just days before the Japanese attack, the 47th Pursuit Squadron was temporarily relocated from Wheeler to a small auxiliary grass airstrip on Oahu's north shore called Halewa Field for gunnery practice. The strip was a simple place, barely more than a grass runway near the coast. The Japanese had no intelligence about it. It did not appear on their target maps. That gap in their knowledge would prove costly. The Curtiss P-40B Warhawk was a single-seat, single-engine pursuit aircraft powered by an Allison V12 engine producing approximately 1,150 horsepower. It carried 2.50 caliber Browning machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc in the cowling, and 4.30 caliber Browning machine guns in the wings. It could not outclimb or outturn the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M20 in a turning fight, but it could outdive almost anything in the sky. In the right hands, at the right angle, it was more than sufficient. By late November of 1941, American military intelligence pointed clearly toward war with Japan. Diplomatic negotiations in Washington had collapsed. Japanese carrier task forces had put to sea. The specific target remained unknown. At Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant General Walter Short was most focused on the risk of sabotage by the island's large ethnic Japanese civilian population. His response was to order all aircraft parked in tight rows, wingtip to wingtip, for easy ground security. They were disarmed for the weekend. They sat on the ramps at Wheeler and Hickam Fields like targets arranged for inspection. On the evening of Saturday, December 6, 1941, the Wheeler Field Officers' Club held its regular dinner dance. Welch and Taylor attended in formal mess dress. According to multiple accounts, the evening continued into an all-night poker game, and neither man had gone properly to sleep when the first explosions hit. They were still in their tuxedo trousers. At 7:55 in the morning on December 7th, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched 353 aircraft from 6 aircraft carriers positioned 230 miles north of Oahu: the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, the Hiryu, the Shokaku, and the Zuikaku. The strike flew in 2 waves. The aircraft types included Mitsubishi A-6M-20 fighters, Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, and Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo and level bombers. Their targets were the battleships at Pearl Harbor and the airfields across Oahu. At 7:55, strike leader Commander Mitsuo Fuchida transmitted the signal that the surprise was complete. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had studied at Harvard and understood American industrial capacity better than most of his fellow admirals, had told his government before the war began that he could run wild in the Pacific for 6 months, perhaps a year, but after that he could guarantee nothing. This attack was not a plan of conquest. It was a gamble, a bet that stunning early losses would give Japan time to fortify its gains in Southeast Asia before America could respond in full. At approximately 8 in the morning, Japanese dive bombers struck Wheeler Field. They came with bombs and then circled back with guns. The tightly packed, unarmed aircraft on the flight line burned in sequence. 33 men were killed at Wheeler that morning. 75 more were wounded. Welch and Taylor came awake to explosions and the scream of engines at low altitude. They ran outside into a morning already sick with smoke and found Pearl Harbor to the south, already a column of orange fire. Japanese aircraft were everywhere, Taylor remembered. The 47th aircraft were at Halewa, 10 miles away on the north coast. The Japanese had no idea Halewa existed. Taylor grabbed a telephone and, without orders, called the Halewa strip directly, telling the ground crew to fuel and arm 2 P-40Bs immediately. Welch ran for Taylor's Buick. Still in tuxedo trousers, they drove north through the pineapple fields at close to 100 miles per hour. Japanese aircraft strafed the car at least once along the way. Neither man was hit. They arrived at Halewa to find their aircraft fueled and idling, but only partially armed. The 4 wing-mounted .30 caliber guns had ammunition. The 2 cowl-mounted .50 caliber guns were empty, their belts stored back at Wheeler. The crew chiefs advised them to spread the aircraft across the field to reduce the target. Welch looked at them and said, "To hell with that." They took off without orders, without clearance, with only their wing gun ammunition loaded. They headed toward Barber's Point on the southwestern coast, where they quickly spotted a formation of Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers working over the Marine Corps airfield at Iwa Mooring Mast Field. The Vals had already dropped their bombs on targets near Pearl Harbor and were strafing Ewa on their way out. This was part of Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi's group from the carrier Shokaku, arriving at Ewa at approximately 8:35 in the morning. Their rear gunners were occupied with ground targets. They did not see 2 P-40Bs arriving from above and behind. Welch dropped in behind the trailing Val and opened fire. Almost immediately, one of his 4 wing guns jammed, leaving him 3. The remaining 3 sent a burst into the Val's engine and fuselage. It caught fire and went down toward the beach. He pulled around behind a second Val and fired several more bursts. That aircraft caught fire as well. His DSC citation later recorded the moment exactly. His plane was then hit by an incendiary bullet that passed through the baggage compartment just behind his seat. He ducked into a cloud to check the aircraft, found nothing structurally wrong, and came back out. He spotted another Japanese aircraft heading south toward open water past Barber's Point, gave chase, and caught it 5 miles offshore. He shot it down into the Pacific. United States Air Force records later identified his kills that day as 3 Aichi D, 3 A-Val dive bombers, and 1 Mitsubishi A-6 M20 fighter. Taylor engaged the same formation and scored kills of his own before both pilots ran low on ammunition and turned for Wheeler. They landed at burning Wheeler to refuel and collect .50 caliber belts for the cowl guns. The flight line was still on fire. Ground crew ran into a damaged hangar to drag ammunition belts out through the smoke. Senior officers told the 2 pilots to stand down. They argued. Welch recalled it afterward. "We had to argue with some of the ground crew. They wanted us to disperse the airplanes and we wanted to fight." Before either aircraft was fully rearmed, A second wave of Japanese planes swept in over Wheeler. The crowd scattered. Taylor bolted for his P-40B, which still had an ammunition box sitting on the wing from the interrupted rearming. It fell off as he climbed. He fired what remained in his guns and pulled into a hard climbing turn that reversed his direction, and found himself almost immediately surrounded by Japanese aircraft. A round pierced his canopy and cut into his left arm. Shrapnel went into his leg. He kept flying. Welch saw a Japanese aircraft lining up behind Taylor. He dove onto it and fired. His DSC citation records the result precisely. The enemy plane burst into flames and crashed halfway between Wahiawa and Halewa. Then Welch turned and chased a Japanese aircraft running west past Barber's Point, caught it 5 miles offshore, and shot it down into the ocean. 4 confirmed kills for Welch, 3 Val dive bombers and 1 Zero fighter. 2 officially confirmed kills for Taylor, though later research using Japanese combat records has supported the view that Taylor also downed 4. 6 between them before 9 in the morning, both flying with only partial armament, without orders, in evening clothes. If you want to know what the Army did with 2 lieutenants who had just accounted for more than 1 in 5 of every Japanese aircraft lost across the entire attack on Pearl Harbor, hit that like button right now. Every like sends this story one step further out into the world, to someone who should know it and does not. Hit subscribe and stay with us. When the Japanese strike force turned north and headed back to its carriers, the accounting began. All 8 battleships at Pearl Harbor had been struck in varying degrees. The Arizona and the Oklahoma were total losses. 2,403 American servicemen and civilians had been killed. 188 American aircraft had been destroyed and 159 more damaged, most of them on the ground before a pilot ever reached them. The official record credits 6 Army pilots with aerial victories that morning. Major Gordon Austin's flight commanders headed the list. First, Lieutenant Lewis Sanders. Second, Lieutenant Philip Rasmussen. Second Lieutenant Harry Brown, Second Lieutenant Gordon Sterling, who was killed in the engagement, Second Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor with 2 confirmed kills, and Second Lieutenant George Welch with 4. Between the 6, 10 Japanese aircraft were officially credited as destroyed. The 29 Japanese aircraft lost across the entire attack was a number that troubled Imperial Japanese Navy planners. Welch's 4 kills represented the highest individual total of the day. General Henry Arnold, the Chief of the Army Air Forces, reviewed what Welch and Taylor had accomplished. According to accounts that have been widely repeated across United States Army histories, Air Force Times, History Magazine, and the World War II database, Arnold recommended both men for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation reportedly traveled up through the Hawaiian Air Force's chain of command, and somewhere in that chain an officer stopped it. The stated reason: Welch and Taylor had taken off without orders. The honest record requires a precise caveat here. The Wikipedia article on Kenneth Taylor states plainly that no primary documentation has been found to support that a Medal of Honor recommendation was either formally submitted or denied for this reason. Historian Robert Dorr, writing for Warfare History Network, argued that the entire denial narrative is legend. What is certain is this: both men received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration for valor in combat. They were the first Americans awarded that decoration in the Second World War. Welch received his at the White House, presented by President Franklin Roosevelt himself. The Distinguished Service Cross citation for Welch documents his actions precisely. It states that he left Wheeler and proceeded by car, under fire, to Halewa Landing Field approximately 10 miles away, that he immediately took off on his own initiative without first obtaining information as to the number or type of Japanese aircraft in the air, and that his initiative, presence of mind, coolness under fire, expert maneuvering, and determined action contributed to a large extent toward driving off the surprise attack. The same initiative that earned him the citation was apparently the reason, if the accounts are accurate, that the higher award was withheld. That question has sat unanswered for more than 80 years. After Pearl Harbor, Welch was sent on the war bond circuit, traveling across America giving speeches as one of the first recognized heroes of a country that had just been plunged into a war it had hoped to avoid. He did it because he was ordered to. Then he went back to the cockpit. He was assigned to the 36th Fighter Squadron of the 8th Fighter Group in New Guinea, flying the Bell P-39 Airacobra out of Port Moresby and forward jungle strips. The P-39 placed its Allison engine behind the cockpit amidships, giving the airframe an unusual center of mass and leaving a substantial block of metal between the pilot's spine and any enemy approach from the rear. When a journalist asked Welch what he liked about the aircraft, he replied, "Well, it has 1,200 pounds of Allison armor plate." He was referring to the engine itself. He was not complimenting the design. On December 7, 1942, the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, Welch shot down a 0 and 2 Val dive bombers in a single engagement over New Guinea. His total confirmed kills reached 7. He applied repeatedly for a transfer to the 80th Fighter Squadron, which flew the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. When the transfer came through, his scoring accelerated significantly. Between June and September of 1943, flying P-38s, he shot down 9 more Japanese aircraft, 2 Zeros, 3 Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony fighters, 3 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters, and 1 Mitsubishi Ki-46 reconnaissance aircraft. He finished the war as a major with 348 combat missions and 16 confirmed aerial victories, placing him among the top Pacific Theater aces. Malaria ended his combat flying in 1943 and put him in a military hospital in Sydney, Australia. There he met a young Australian woman named Jeanette Alice Williams. They married on October 25, 1943, at Darling Point, New South Wales. They would have 2 sons. In the spring of 1944, North American Aviation approached General Arnold for a recommendation. The company was building the next generation of American fighter aircraft and needed a test pilot with real combat experience and steadiness at extreme speed. Arnold suggested Welch. Welch resigned his commission and took the civilian job. He began with the P-51H Mustang and the P-82 Twin Mustang. Then came the aircraft that would define the post-war chapter of his career. North American's engineers had studied captured German research into swept-wing aerodynamics and incorporated it into a new design, a swept-wing jet fighter designated the XP-86. Welch was named chief test pilot for the program. The XP-86 prototype was transported to Muroc Dry Lake in the California desert, the vast flat alkali lakebed in the Mojave that would later become Edwards Air Force Base. On October 1, 1947, Welch made the aircraft's first flight. During the approach to land, the nose gear would not fully extend. He spent considerable time working through the system before landing in a nose-high attitude on the dry lakebed. On touchdown, the nose gear snapped down and locked. The aircraft was undamaged. What the official record does not fully capture is what Albert Blackburn, a fellow North American test pilot who was present at Muroc that autumn, later documented in his book Aces Wild, published with a copyright date of 1998. Blackburn reconstructed the events and concluded that during the high-speed passes of that October 1 flight, the XP-86 exceeded the speed of sound in a dive. Ground observers near the Pancho Barnes Happy Bottom Riding Club on the desert floor reported hearing the distinctive double crack of a sonic shock wave. Blackburn placed a second occurrence on October 14, 1947. Approximately 20 minutes before Captain Charles Yeager made the first officially recognized supersonic flight in the Bell X-1 rocket plane later that same day. This is a contested claim and must be held as such. Secretary of the Air Force, Stuart Symington, had issued a direct order. The XP-86 was not to break the sound barrier before the Bell X-1 did. The X-1 was a dedicated research aircraft built specifically to claim that record officially. Yeager's flight on October 14 was fully instrumented, sanctioned, and documented. He reached Mach 1.06 in level flight. That record stands. Blackburn's claim that Welch preceded Yeager by roughly 20 minutes is disputed by Bob Hoover, who was the chase pilot for both programs that autumn, and who denied the Welch timeline directly. Engineer Robert Kempel, analyzing North American's own high Mach number investigation documents, argued that the J-35 engine in the XP-86 prototype that day was likely underpowered for supersonic speed, even in a steep dive. What is not disputed is what instrumentation confirmed 11 days later. On November 13, 1947, Ground-Based National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics Radar Equipment measured the XP-86 at Mach 1.02 and Mach 1.04 in dives, using the same dive profile Welch had used on October 1 and October 14. The aircraft had not been modified between those flights and the November measurement. It had been capable of supersonic speed in a dive from the beginning. On April 26, 1948, the XP-86 officially went supersonic for the record. And on May 25, 1953, Welch flew the prototype YF-100A Super Sabre on its first ever test flight and exceeded the speed of sound in level flight, a figure the Air Force Test Center records as Mach 1.1. It was the first time any aircraft had gone supersonic on its maiden flight. The Air Force Test Center records this achievement on its official historical page without dispute. The man who may have crossed the sound barrier before Yeager, and who certainly flew the aircraft that first proved supersonic speed on an initial flight, was never publicly credited for either. Yeager became one of the most recognized names in American aviation. Welch remained largely unknown outside specialist circles, his name attached mainly to the one morning in 1941 when he drove a car through a strafing attack to reach a grass strip the enemy didn't know existed. By the autumn of 1954, Welch was North American's chief engineering test pilot. The F-100A Super Sabre, America's first operational jet capable of supersonic speed in level flight, had a dangerous aerodynamic problem. At very high speeds and certain angles of attack, the aircraft could enter what engineers called inertial roll coupling, a condition in which the forces acting on the airframe overwhelm the pilot's ability to control it. The vertical fin was too small for the forces being generated at extreme speed. The aircraft became unstable. Welch was systematically pushing the envelope to document the problem precisely enough for engineers to fix it. On Tuesday, October 12, 1954, he took off, flying the 9th production, F-100A, serial number 52-5-7-6-4. The planned maneuver called for a dive from 45,000 feet to Mach 1.55, followed by a pullout at 7.3 G, verifying the aircraft's structural design limits under near-combat conditions. A Boeing B-47 Stratojet crew at 25,000 feet observed what happened from 4 miles away. The F-100A descended at high speed, appeared to be under control, and then came apart. Inertial roll coupling. The nose folded over the windshield, crushing Welch in his seat. The vertical fin sheared away. The ejection seat fired, but at supersonic speed the parachute was torn to pieces before it could deploy properly. Welch came down, still strapped to the ejection seat in a vacant field northeast of Lancaster, California. Rescue teams found him alive. He died while being flown by helicopter to the 65 10th United States Air Force Hospital at Edwards Air Force Base. He was 36 years old. The accident investigation confirmed inertial roll coupling as the cause. Following Welch's death, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics test pilot Albert Scott Crossfield spent 3 months conducting flight tests of the F-100A, working through 3 different vertical fin designs to characterize the problem. The solution was a larger, taller fin. The corrected aircraft returned to service. Every pilot who flew the F-100 Super Sabre through the Cold War, through Korea, through Vietnam, and through the long patrols over Europe that defined 2 decades of American air power owed something to the data Welch gathered in those final months, and to what he confirmed with his last flight. George Schwartz Welch is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The Distinguished Service Cross citation says his actions contributed to a large extent toward driving off the surprise attack. That is formal language, careful and measured. Here is what it describes in plain terms. On the morning America entered the Second World War, when most of the aircraft on Oahu were already burning on their ramps and the sky above Pearl Harbor was full of Japanese planes, a 23-year-old man in evening clothes drove through a strafing run to reach a grass airstrip the enemy did not know existed, took off without authority in a half-armed aircraft into the largest air attack ever launched against the United States, and shot down 4 enemy aircraft before coming home. The Army gave him the Distinguished Service Cross. Accounts going back to General Arnold suggest he was in line for more than that, though no document has been found to confirm the full story of how the higher award was proposed or refused. 16 Medals of Honor were eventually awarded for actions on December 7, 1941, going to Navy sailors and 1 Marine officer acting at installations across the Hawaiian Islands. None went to a pilot. The gap has been noted by veterans and historians for decades. It has never been officially addressed. Kenneth Taylor recovered from his wounds. He went on to score additional aerial victories at Guadalcanal before a leg injury sustained during an air raid ended his combat career. He rose through the ranks over 27 years of active service, ultimately retiring as a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. He died on November 25, 2006, in Tucson, Arizona, and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. A United States Army elementary school on Oahu carries Welch's name above its door. It stands on the site of the old Wheeler Field, on the same ground where the bombs fell and the flight line burned, and two young men in evening clothes argued with their crew chief about whether to scatter the aircraft or take them into the air. Most of the children who walk through that door every morning do not know the full weight of the name above them. Most people who know anything about Pearl Harbor know the names of the battleships. They know the harbor. They know the speech. They do not know the name of the 23-year-old in tuxedo trousers who drove through a strafing attack, took off without orders, and shot down 4 Japanese aircraft on the worst morning in American naval history. Hit that like button right now, not for an algorithm. For the record, every like puts this story in front of someone who has never heard it and should. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We go through archives, citations, official records, and contemporary accounts to find men like Welch, men whose stories sat in filing cabinets and footnotes while their names slowly faded from public memory, and we bring those stories here every week. Drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Pacific, in Europe, in Korea, or in the conflicts that came after. This comment section is a record, not just a conversation. Every name matters. George Schwartz Welch, born Wilmington, Delaware, 1918, died above the Mojave Desert, 1954. In between, 348 combat missions, 16 confirmed aerial victories, the aircraft that may have crossed the sound barrier before anyone else, and a test pilot's death that made the jets that followed him safer to fly. He never waited for permission when waiting would have cost something that mattered. His country gave him the second highest award it had, and spent decades debating whether that was enough. His name is on a school. His story is here. Now you know it.